Hello hunters, it's Drew, back with another discussion type video. I want to talk about grounded switch axe playstyle. In this gameplay I have here, I'm using the Zenogre switch axe with foul switch boost, and showcasing the grounded playstyle. Not a speedrun or anything, just a casual hunt. We are fighting a level 96 Afflicted Tigrex. Grounded switch axe is by far my favorite way to play the weapon right now. And the Tigrex matchup in particular is a lot of fun. We can be very aggressive with the burst counters. I have been spending more time than I like to admit farming essences for augments, and this matchup has been a huge help in keeping that interesting. So, what is the grounded playstyle? The grounded playstyle focuses on burst counters as well as mostly using rapid morph loops. Rapid morph increasing damage of our morph attacks by 20%. And for power files, the Rampage Decoration file switch boost further enhances our morph attacks. This makes our ground attacks particularly strong, hence the grounded playstyle. However, aerial switch axe is more focused on using Sum Discharge with the Soaring Wyvern Blade and Switch Charger to recover your file gauge, but these attacks don't benefit from rapid morph or file switch boost. As a result, we get a distinction between these two types of playstyles. Now, I think it's important to say that the aerial playstyle is not weak by any means, and I think it should be pretty clear that it is not. I just enjoy the grounded switch axe playstyle quite a bit more. Playing with defensive options, like the burst counter or even the wire step, is very rewarding. With file switch boost, there is added thought to managing my gauge with proper use of morph attacks. I find I'm constantly thinking about whether or not I want to be in sword or axe mode. I just find it to be a very satisfying way to play the weapon. As an aside, I think it is really interesting how far Switch Axe has gone in Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak. It is very far gone from that weapon where it's just try to stay in sword mode for as long as possible. You might notice that I have Adrenaline Rush on the build here that I use against Tigrex. With last week in my status trigger build, I got a little bit attached to wire step, so I'm kind of like all in now with that. I don't run Soaring Wyvern Blade and just run the wire step. I find that wire step is actually really nice because what it ends up doing is that the Elemental Burst counter has this big wind up to it, and sometimes you don't have time to wind it up. And in those cases, you can just use a wire step instead. And if you do successfully dodge an attack, you get a raw attack buff for about 30 seconds. I think there's a lot of value there. And it's actually really nice to have because you can have the burst counter for things that you clearly are seeing that's coming, and you have the wire step for like last minute dodges. Pretty funny moment here with this burst counter. Tigrex's arm actually reaches over me and hits me from behind. I was pretty confused about why I didn't get the counter there. So, with the distinction with aerial switch axe and grounded switch axe, I don't think necessarily in grounded style you should just completely avoid using Sum Discharge. I think that it has applications and it's still a really powerful attack. However, I don't like to use it here on Tigrex, mostly because a lot of Tigrex attacks cover its entire body with a hitbox, and I find I just end up dying. Even with the Blood Blight status, I still don't find that I drain my health back fast enough to survive some of Tigrex's attacks when I'm latched on. But a good example of why you might want to use Sum is for monsters similar to Tigrex, like Nargacuga or Varioth, or even Tigrex himself. When you break their arms, they have a topple. And Sum Discharge is very good at dealing damage to one specific part of the monster. So the value of doing a Sum in that case for the topple might outweigh the priorities of, doing another burst counter or hitting more morph combos or something like that. Side effect of not using Sum Discharge as much is that your file gauge are just going to be a lot easier to manage. You won't really need to use the switch charger as much. The file switch boost makes your axe morph attacks generate a significant amount more file gauge, and it can be pretty easily managed by just properly managing your axe morph attacks. This ends up playing really well with skills like Dereliction and Mail of Hellfire, skills that really want you to be in a specific scroll. And because your gauge is easy to manage, you don't need to worry about having to switch to a different scroll to be able to use switch charge and get your gauge and switch back. And especially with Dereliction, you lose attack if you switch off a blue scroll. So this playstyle plays very well to those kinds of skills. I still have builds using element file switch axes and do use them for matchups where a monster is very weak to a certain element, and use skills like element exploit and the element bane rampage decoration. However, I found I just prefer to bring an element power file for anything that takes a moderate amount of raw damage. An interesting thing with the burst counter is that it has a very large motion value. It deals a lot of damage, and if it is your primary source of damage throughout your hunt, it doesn't have any foul bursts related to it. So going for crit related skills might actually be the way to go if the majority of your damage is from the burst counter. So I've been considering making content on the grounded playstyle, although I don't really consider myself an expert or anything, so I'm trying to consider what I might want to make with maybe some basic guides and build guidelines or something like that. I've also been thinking about putting together some element builds perhaps, and maybe these can go together or something like that. If you would be interested in something like this, let me know in the comments. But I think this video has gone on long enough. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.